What's up guys, my name is Ace and welcome back to Spawn Guides. This is the series where I share all of the most common spawn locations on every single map in Black Ops 3 for several different game modes. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the map Evac. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so I'm going to start this episode off with a disclaimer. If you haven't seen the episodes before this one, you're going to want to go and watch those first because I introduce a base of knowledge in those episodes for each of the different game modes that you pretty much need to understand as we go through this series from now on. Because basically, I'm going to be showing the spawn locations in these episodes, and I'm assuming you already understand how they work because I already talked in great detail about each specific game mode in the previous, 4 episodes I think we've covered. So if you haven't seen those yet and you want to go check them out, I will leave a link down below and that'll link you to the playlist and you can just watch those first 4 episodes. So let's start this episode off with Team Deathmatch. As you can see right here, these are all of the most common spawn locations that you're going to see on Evac. There's quite a few of them for the size of the map. I was actually quite surprised at how many spawns there are, but that's a trend that we see a lot in Black Ops 3. One thing you'll notice is there really aren't very many spawns towards the middle of the map, which also follows suit. We do have that one exception there, but that's pretty much the only exception where we have a spawn towards the middle of the map. And one thing you'll notice too is there's a bit of a dead zone where there aren't really many spawns, and that's towards the bottom side of the map as you're looking at it now, where the water area is. There really aren't any spawn points down there, so just keep that in mind as you're playing through this map. That's kind of a dead zone. So while you're actually in the game, this is a little bit too much to think about, a little bit too much information with all these different spawn points, so I actually simplify it in my head, and to me it looks more like this. We have about 6 main areas where enemies are going to spawn. Obviously, I grouped some of those spawns together, but with Team Deathmatch, you don't typically need to know the exact spawn location of your enemies. You just want to know which spawn area they're at so you can tell where they're going to be coming from and where you need to attack. One thing you'll notice is I left that one little spawn towards the middle of the map. I left that on its own. This one sort of acts as an emergency spawn, so if for whatever reason all of the other spawn locations around the map are really blocked off, then it's very likely that you'll end up spawning at this middle spawn here. So it's something that you don't really have to worry about most of the time, but keep it in the back of your head that if your enemies or if your teammates are really spread out around the edges of the map, that it's very possible that they'll get that middle spawn. Moving on to Domination, the spawns actually look very, very similar for Domination, but one thing to keep in mind is we only really have A spawns and C spawns. So we don't have any spawns that seem to be specifically attached to the B flag on this map. So if you only hold the B flag, it's basically just going to pick the safest A or C spawns, and that's where you're going to end up spawning. As you can see, we've got even more spawns though in Domination, especially on the A side of the map. You can see just how many spawn points there are, and because of this, it can be relatively hard to actually flip these spawns out from the A flag. So you can be pretty deep into enemy territory towards the A flag, and a lot of the times you'll still have enemies spawning all around you. So just keep that in mind, especially if you push in all by yourself towards the A spawns and you know your teammates have the rest of the map covered off. It's very likely that enemies will start spawning all around you. But again, let's look at the more simplified version. This is more how I see it in my head most of the time. It can be helpful to know the exact spawn locations, but this is simple enough. These spawns behave exactly how you'd expect based on my explanation from the first or second episode when I covered Domination. If you hold the A flag, you're going to be spawning at these A spawns unless they're all blocked off, which is quite rare. And if you hold the C flag, you're going to be spawning at all of the C spawns, unless those are all blocked off, in which case you might flip to an A spawn. Moving on to Safeguard, this is where things definitely change up as far as spawns go. You'll notice a lot of these spawn locations are a little bit different than Team Deathmatch and Domination, and they definitely behave differently as well, which is what we expect with Safeguard. So for the defensive team, the green team here, the spawns are very straightforward. They're just going to pick whichever spawn, basically, it seems like, until you start getting a lot of pressure on those spawns. Then the enemies can start pushing the spawns around. So if they push the top side of the map, once they get towards the end of the round, typically, like where the kitchen is up there, it'll push the green team spawn down towards the bottom side of the map, and vice versa. If they push the bottom, it will push the green team spawn up towards the top side of the map. Also, you may notice this one green spawn way up here. This is kind of an emergency spawn when the enemy team puts so much pressure on the green spawns that there's just no safe spawn for them. So it will sometimes flip out to this. It's fairly rare, but it's just something to keep an eye on and just have that in the back of your mind that if you start putting so much pressure on those spawns that they just have nowhere to go, that's where they're going to flip to most of the time. As for the escorting team spawn, this is something that requires a little bit more explanation. So when the robot first starts out for its first initial stretch, up until it gets to where the water is towards the middle of the map, the spawns are almost always going to be happening at the top side of the map. And this is just because the fight is usually going on towards the bottom side of the map, which just puts a lot of pressure on those laundry spawns and those back center spawns, which pushes those spawns up towards the top side of the map. So just in case you're wondering if you're on the defensive team or you're trying to destroy the robot and you have teammates pushed up there, they are definitely going to be spawning up towards the top side of that map. And a lot of the times they'll push straight towards your flank from there. So really be aware of that. Now, once the robot starts to get more towards that halfway point where it's in the middle of the map area, that's when the spawns typically start to settle towards the standard back center spawns or like the laundry spawns. Somewhere down here, this is where the spawns typically settle once that robot's on the second half of its journey. Now, with Safeguard on this map, I don't like to simplify the spawns and group them together. And that's simply due to the fact that spawns can be very sticky with this game mode. So you can be right up around the corner from a spawn point and the enemies can still be spawning there. So because of that, I feel that it's very important to actually know every individual spawn location so that you're fully aware of where enemies can spawn, even if it's right around the corner from you. So finally, let's have a look at the free-for-all spawns on Evac. And as you can see, there are a lot of them, especially for this size of a map. I wouldn't expect quite so many spawns, and there's a ton of spawns that are really close to other spawn points. So just be aware that you might not want to be thinking about predicting the exact spawn locations. We're going to simplify things once again here, and we're going to treat it more like this. These big spawns here are the most common spawn areas that you'll expect most of the time. I'll consider these to be kind of primary spawns. And keep in mind, with these, I've actually grouped a couple spawns together with some of them, so this isn't necessarily the exact spawn point, but like I said, there's just so many spawn locations that you can't be worrying about exact spawn points on this map for free-for-all. So most of the time, they are going to be spawning at one of these big spawn areas. But just keep it in the back of your mind that those small spawns are there as well. So your strategy should be focused more around the primary spawns here, but just realize that there are enemies that can spawn towards the middle of the map, for instance. So just be aware of that and be ready for that to potentially happen throughout the game. So there we have it. That's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Spawn Guides. Now, I know we kind of blasted through every single game mode really quickly, but that's the plan from here on out with this series. I've introduced a lot more detail in the previous episodes, and from here on out, it's basically sharing the spawn points and any little special things that I need to mention. Let me know in the comment section below which one of the maps you'd like me to cover next. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.